everyone and welcome back. In this video we will be reading another chapter of the Miraculous. Chapter 5. The house on Egypt Street became frantic with activity as the Tulane family prepared for their voyage to England. Edward possessed a small trunk, and Adeline packed it for him, filling it with his fine suits and several of his best hats, and 3 pairs of shoes, also that he might cut a fine figure in London. Before she placed each outfit in his trunk, she displayed it to him. "Do you like the shirt with the suit?" she asked him. "Or would you like to wear your black derby? You look very handsome in it. Shall we pack it?" And then finally, on a bright Saturday morning in May, Edward, Adeline, and Mr. and Mrs. Tulane were all on board the ship, standing at the railing. Pellegrin was at the dock. On her head she wore a floppy hat strung around with flowers. She stared straight at Edward. Her dark eyes glowed. "Goodbye," Adeline shouted to her grandmother. "I love you." The ship pulled away from the dock. Pellegrin waved to Adeline. "Goodbye, lady," she called. "Goodbye." Edward felt something damp in his ears. Adeline's tears, he supposed. He wished that she would not hold him so tight. To be clutched so fiercely often resulted in wrinkled clothing. Finally, all the people on land, including Pellegrin, had disappeared. Edward, for one, was relieved to see the last of her. As was to be expected, Edward Tulane exacted much attention on board the ship. "What a singular rabbit," said an elderly lady with 3 strings of pearls wrapped around her neck. She bent down to look more closely at Edward. "Thank you," said Adeline. Several little girls on board gave Edward deep glances full of longing. They asked Adeline if they might hold him. "No," said Adeline. "I'm afraid that he's not the kind of rabbit who likes to be held by strangers." 2 young boys, brothers named Martin and Amos, took a particular interest in Edward. "What does he do?" Martin asked Adeline on their second day at sea. He pointed at Edward, who was sitting on a deck chair with his long legs stretched in front of him. "He doesn't do anything," said Adeline. "Does he wind up somewhere?" asked Amos. "No," said Adeline. "He does not wind up." "What's the point of him, then?" said Martin. "The point is that he is Edward," said Adeline. "That's not much of a point," said Amos. "It's not," agreed Martin. And then, after a long, thoughtful pause, he said, "I wouldn't let anybody dress me like that." "Me neither," said Amos. "Do his clothes come off?" asked Martin. "Of course they do," said Adeline. "He has many different outfits, and he has his own pajamas, too. They are made of silk." Edward, as usual, was disregarding the conversation. A breeze was blowing in off the sea, and the silk scarf wrapped around his neck billowed out behind him. On his head he wore a straw boater. The rabbit was thinking that he must look quite dashing. It came as a total surprise to him when he was grabbed off the deck chair, and first his scarf, then his jacket and pants were ripped from his body. He heard the pocket watch hit the deck of the ship, and then, held upside down, he watched the watch roll merrily toward Adeline's feet. "Look at him," said Martin. "He's even got underwear." He held Edward aloft so that Amos could see. "Take it off," shouted Amos. "No!" screamed Adeline. Martin removed Edward's underwear. Edward was paying attention now. He was mortified. He was completely naked except for the hat on his head, and the other passengers on board the ship were looking at him, directly curious and embarrassed glances his way. "Give him to me," screamed Adeline. "He's mine." "No," said Amos to Martin. "Give him to me." He clapped his hands together and then held him open. "Toss him," he said. "Please," cried Adeline. "Don't throw him. He's made of china. He'll break." Martin threw Edward, and Edward sailed naked through the air. Only a moment ago the rabbit had thought that being naked in front of a shipload of strangers was the worst thing that could happen to him. But he was wrong. It was much worse being tossed in the same naked state from the hands of one grubby, laughing boy to another. Amos caught Edward and held him up, displaying him triumphantly. "Throw him back," called Martin. Amos raised his arm, but just as he was getting ready to throw Edward, Adeline tackled him, shoving her head into his stomach and upsetting the boy's aim. So it was that Edward did not go fly back into the dirty hands of Martin. Instead, Edward Tulane went overboard. Chapter 6. How does China Rabbit die? Can a china rabbit drown? Is my hat still on my head? These are the questions that Edward asked himself as he was sailing out over the blue sea. The sun was high in the sky, and from what seemed to be a very long way away, Edward heard Adeline call his name. "Edward!" she said. "Come back!" Come back? Of all the ridiculous things to shout, thought Edward. As he tumbled ears over tail through the air, he managed to catch one last glimpse of Adeline. She was standing on the deck of the ship, holding onto the rail with one hand. In her other hand was a lamp. No, it was a ball of fire. No, Edward realized, it was his gold pocket watch that Adeline held in her hand. She was holding it up high, and it was reflecting the light of the sun. My pocket watch, he thought. I need that. And then Adeline disappeared from view, and the rabbit hit the water with such tremendous force that his hat blew off his head. That answers that question, thought Edward as he watched the hat dance away on the wind. And then he began to sink. He sank and sank and sank. He kept his eyes open the whole time, not because he was brave, but because he had no choice. His painted-on eyes witnessed the blue water turning to green and then to blue again. They watched as it finally became as black as night. Edward went down and down. He said to himself, "If I am going to drown, certainly I would have done so by now." Far above him, the ocean liner, with Adeline aboard it, sailed blissfully on, and the china rabbit landed finally on the ocean floor, face down, and there with his head in the muck he experienced his first genuine and true emotion. Edward Tulane was afraid. Chapter 7. He told himself that certainly Adeline would come and find him. This, Edward thought, is much like waiting for Adeline to come home from school. I will pretend that I am in the diary room of the house on Egypt Street, wait for the little hand to move to the 3 and the big hand to land on the 12. If only I had my watch, then I would know for sure. But it doesn't matter. She will be here soon, very soon. Hours passed, and then days and weeks and months. Adeline did not come. Edward, for lack of anything better to do, began to think. He thought about the stars. He remembered what they looked like from his bedroom window. What made them shine so brightly, he wondered, and were they still shining somewhere even though he could not see them? Never in my life, he thought, have I been farther away from the stars than I am now. He considered, too, the fate of the beautiful princess who had become a warthog. Why had she become a warthog? Because the ugly witch turned her into one. That was why. And then the rabbit thought about Pellegrina. He felt in some way that he could not explain to himself that she was responsible for what had happened to him. It was almost as if it was she, and not the boys, who had thrown Edward overboard. She was like the witch in the story. No, she was the witch in the story. True, she did not turn him into a warthog, but just the same she was punishing him, although for what he could not say. On the 297th day of Edward's ordeal, a storm came. The storm was so powerful that it lifted Edward off the ocean floor and led him in a crazy, wild, and spinning dance. The water pummeled him and lifted him up and shoved him back down. Help, thought Edward. The storm in its ferocity actually flung him all the way out of the sea, and the rabbit glimpsed for a moment the light of an angry and bruised sky. The wind rushed through his ears. It sounded to him like Pellegrina was laughing, but before he had time to appreciate being above water, he was tossed back down into the depths. Up and down, back and forth he went until the storm wore itself out. Edward saw that he was beginning again his slow descent to the ocean floor. Oh, help me, he thought. I can't go back there. Help me. But still down he went, down, down, down. And then suddenly the great wide net of a fisherman reached out and grabbed the rabbit. The net lifted him higher and higher until there was almost an unbearable explosion of light, and Edward was back in the world, lying on the deck of a ship surrounded by fish. "Hey, what's this?" said a voice. "Ain't no fish," said another voice. "That's for sure." The light was so brilliant that it was hard for Edward to see. But finally shapes appeared out of the light, and then faces. Edward realized that he was looking up at 2 men, one young and one old. "Looks like some toy," said the grizzled one man. He bent to pick Edward up, and held him by his front paws, considering him. A rabbit, I reckon. He's got whiskers and rabbit ears, or the shape of rabbit ears at least. Yeah, sure, a rabbit toy, said the younger man, and he turned away. I'll take it home to Nellie. Let her fix it up as it to rights. Give it some child. The old man placed Edward carefully on a crate, positioning him so that he was sitting up they could look out at the sea. Edward appreciated the courtesy of this small gesture, but he was heartily sick of the ocean and would have been satisfied never to set eyes on it again. There you go, said the old man. As they made their way back to shore, Edward felt the sun on his face and the wind blowing through the little bit of fur left on his ears, and something filled his chest. A wonderful feeling. He was glad to be alive. Look at that rabbit, the old man said. Looks like he's enjoyed the ride, don't it? Yep, said the young man. In fact, Edward Tulane was so happy to be back among the living that he did not even take umbrage at being referenced to as it. Chapter 8. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for the next chapter. See you next time.